Keeping reptiles as pets is well established in society and yet a controversial topic due to concerns over animal welfare, conservation, and public health. Accurate figures are unavailable, but it is estimated there are between 700,000 to 1.7 million reptiles kept as pets in the UK. This is a growing trend, so warrants exploration. In the UK, in 2016, RSPCA received nearly 7,000 calls to its cruelty line about reptiles, with 1,689 animals seized, marking a 23% increase over the last 5 years. Serious health issues and suffering are more common per capita in reptiles than those kept in zoos or compared to domestic pets such as dogs and cats. For example, a recent study in companion animals in the United Kingdom showed that premature mortality was 75% within the first year of owning the reptile. This would be simply unacceptable in domestic pets. Issues surrounding keeping reptiles as pets include the suboptimal husbandry that does not meet their needs as specified under the Animal Welfare Act of 2006, resulting in unnecessary suffering. Keepers may not have sufficient knowledge or skills to provide for these animals, and false information is spread due to folklore husbandry. This presentation aims to address some of these misconceptions, such as agoraphobia and their suitability for captivity, whilst utilising the One Health approach to explore the welfare issues of reptiles themselves in depth, whilst briefly discussing the public health and conservation issues, whilst addressing potential solutions. So, why should we pay attention to the welfare issues of reptiles as pets? Simply put, reptiles are recognised to be sentient and more cognitively complex than most people realise. This is a concern, as if a reptile keeper attributes lower sentience and intelligence to the animal, there will be less motivation to ensure their welfare is good, potentially not realising the animal can feel fear, pain and pleasure. A review by Lambert et al. 2019 found reptiles were evidence to be capable of at least 8 aspects of sentience in scientific literature, including anxiety, stress, distress, excitement, fear, frustration, pain and suffering. For example, green iguanas and turtles had an emotional response to a stressful experience of handling. Reptiles are also more cognitively complex than is widely realised, with certain species showing evidence of complex sociality, play behaviour, problem solving, gaze following, social and imitative learning, and long-term memory. These animals are highly aware of their environment, but this may not be realised by keepers. Therefore, the perceptions of reptiles are important, as an underestimation of their cognition and sentience can lead to suffering. There is a misconception that reptiles cope well and even thrive in captivity, and that they're easy to look after. However, this fails to acknowledge their strong innate drives, with some reptile species precocial, meaning they're born and hatched in an advanced developmental state. This evolutionary adaptation is advantageous in the wild, but disadvantageous to the artificial restricted captive environments they're held in. The false impression of good welfare may occur due to the reptile's relatively slow metabolism, allowing them to tolerate conditions for longer even when they're severely distressed and in poor health. Breeding animals in captivity does not resolve this problem, and there's no evidence of domestication in reptiles. They have not undergone the same long domestication process evidenced in dogs and cats. Captive-bred reptiles demonstrate the same indicators of stress and captivity as free-living individuals do when captive. These reptiles are not adapted to the UK climate and are completely dependent on their keeper to provide for their needs. Under the Animal Welfare Act of 2006, there's a legal duty of care to meet the 5 welfare needs and prevent unnecessary suffering. However, in one survey of vets, it was estimated up to 47% of reptile patients were not having all 5 needs met. Notably, these reptiles were the ones taken to the vet, which is only an actual small part of the population, so this statistic could be much higher. In this survey, the most common need not being met was the need for a suitable environment, at 89%. This is unsurprising, as components of artificial environments are notoriously complex, with many dynamic species-specific variables to consider. This concerns the desired temperature, humidity, lighting, spatial factors, which are completely dependent on the keeper consistently providing this for the reptile. Poor environmental conditions can lead to unnecessary suffering due to distress and disease, and from preventing normal behaviour. Animals in the wild can self-regulate to escape these harmful environmental conditions. However, in captivity they cannot. Providing the correct temperature for reptiles is vital, as they are ectothermic, meaning their body temperature and optimal functioning is dependent on the external environmental temperature. However, many reptile patients presented to vets as ill as a result of chronic hypothermia, whereas, alternatively, excessive heat can lead to problems such as heat stroke and death. Thermal burns can result from unprotected or faulty heat sources and can lead to bacterial infection. For example, here is a leopard gecko with 2nd and 3rd degree burns due to a malfunctioning heat mat. Inappropriate UV provision in housing can cause serious health problems also. Too little UV can cause metabolic bone disease due to reptiles' inability to absorb sufficient vitamin D in their diet, a condition frequently seen in captive reptiles. Whereas too much UV lighting can cause the reptile to develop photodermatitis and keratoconjunctivitis. Reptiles with this condition exhibit signs of pain and depression. Death may result within days as a direct result of trauma from severe dehydration due to the inability to bioauscultate fluids. Whilst most owners may be aware of the necessity of UV lighting, there is added complexities of the placement, distance, angle of the bulb, which then may vary in individual output and also need to be replaced every 6 months. Problems arise in nutrition. Calcium must be provided alongside UV light in some reptiles, or metabolic bone disease can occur. Little is known about the nutrient requirements of reptile species or of the digestibility of feed items provided to them. Obesity and the resultant high health issues are common. Reptiles are very easily overfed or fed the wrong food due to owner ignorance, such as feeding dog food to tortoises, which are totally herbivorous but will eat meat if offered it. For insectivorous reptiles, the insects they're eating are not those they are adapted to in the wild. They're less varied with different nutrient profiles, and the long-term effects of this are unclear. There are also welfare and ethical issues to be considered in the feeding of live food to reptiles. Prey are subjected to extreme stresses and a potentially slow death. It is currently illegal to feed live vertebrate prey to another animal in the UK, but an ethical discussion could be also had due to emerging debate of sentience in invertebrates. Reptiles are commonly kept in overly restrictive environments due to inaccurate advice from a trader, hobbyist, or online. These environments do not allow for normal behaviour, physical exercise, or mental stimulation. They also restrict choice and the needed environmental gradients available, potentially worsening the appropriate provision of heat, lighting, and humidity. Folklore husbandry perpetuates the false understanding that reptiles are sedentary or even agoraphobic, feeling safer in small environments, with an underestimation of the need for enrichment. For example, it's often claimed bearded dragons, the most common pet lizard in the UK, should be kept in 4 foot by 2 foot by 2 foot vivariums, which is only double their full length. Justifications that they are sedentary and not avid climbers. These small vivariums are seen as acceptable for exotic pets. This one is even labelled as the ideal bearded dragon habitat by one advised website. Yet, free-living bearded dragons are active, hunting, foraging, semi-arboreal animals. It is clear their species-specific behavioural needs cannot be met in these small cages. Notably, there are actually 6 species of bearded dragons, each with slightly different needs and added unknown complexity. Not only is space essential for behaviour and welfare, it is also important to accommodate an animal's ability to be in its preferred posture. This plays a role in their comfort and thermal needs, as well as aiding digestion. However, in the case of snakes, even the basic need to fully stretch out is not recognised, yet keeping any other pet this way would not be acceptable. The lack of recognition for spatial needs for snakes is demonstrated in non-scientific regulations by DEFRA and the Animal Welfare Licensing of Activities Involving Animals Regulations of 2018. This states snakes should not be kept in an enclosure no less than 2/3 of their length, nose to tail. This is despite evidence that snakes seek and need space, and evidence also shows captivity stress-related behaviours associated with snakes in smaller enclosures. It is instead suggested an absolute minimum linear dimension of any enclosure should be 10 times the coiled or ball diameter of an animal. It's scientifically and morally acceptable for snakes to be kept this way. They are the only animal order prevented by flawed policy from stretching their bodies in captivity. As well as health problems occurring from the inappropriate captive environment, it can also lead to the development of abnormal, repetitive behaviours, such as escape-related behaviours, hyperactivity, and interaction with transparent boundaries. The reptiles repetitively move along the edges of the container, causing itself injuries and abrasion. Abnormal behaviours can also be exhibited, such as the pica, due to understimulating environments and boredom. This can cause intestinal impactions, as in this tortoise that consumes stones. These abnormal behaviours are extremely common and can be physically injurious, yet many of these signs are ignored by keepers. The need to be protected from pain, suffering, injury, and disease is clearly interconnected to the other needs for a suitable environment, diet, and behaviour. As previously mentioned, reptiles can mask their disease, and owners typically fail to recognise early signs, only seeking veterinary assistance when issues become advanced and potentially terminal. Veterinary care is increasing in proficiency for exotic pets. It's on the curriculum for most vet schools, and an increase in herpetology specialisations are available. However, many reptile keepers do not consult the veterinary professionals, as there may not be a specialist vet in the vicinity, or treatment might be unavailable. poor welfare of a reptile is rarely from deliberate cruelty, but often just from negligence. An RSPCA report found that underpinning many welfare issues is the lack of knowledge from reptile owners due to failure to carry out their own research and a failure of reliable information provided at the point of sale, whether a pet shop or online purchase. Optimal husbandry and welfare needs of many species of reptiles are not fully understood by biological science, yet alone pet owners. This lack of knowledge does not only lead to poor welfare, but can also lead to relinquishment if the owner loses interest in the commitment of the animal. This could be because care is too costly or difficult, if the animal grows too large to look after, or the animal is too long-lived. These factors contribute to a reptile being sold on, relinquished to a shelter, or even released into the wild, which is extremely detrimental to their welfare as well as the ecosystem. Reptiles often have more than one home due to this in their lifetime, and this further dilutes information about their care. Obtaining a reptile is incredibly easy, whether from pet shops, private breeders, or more commonly the internet. The sourcing of a pet reptile is an issue. Commercial, captive-bred individuals often face intensive rearing conditions with stressful transport and handling. In a study of one US wildlife wholesaler, there was found to be a mortality rate of 72% over 6 weeks. This meant nearly 3,500 deceased or dying individuals were discarded weekly, most of which were reptiles, and this is accepted as the industry standard. Also, just as in the case of pets, cats and dogs, reptile species, and particularly snakes, are also bred for aesthetic purposes, the creation of so-called morphs. However, this increases the risk of inbreeding, depression, and disease. Wild capture is frequently traumatic, involving injuries, stressful handling, long transport periods, and poor husbandry. This leads to significant stress, suffering, and death. Animals that are claimed to be captive-bred may actually be wild-caught, using the status as society's loophole, or their parents or predecessors will have been wild-caught. A dominating factor in the population decline of reptile species is this wild capture to supply the legal and illegal exotic pet trade. For example, between 2002 and 2006, 1,000 critically endangered Egyptian tortoises were illegally trafficked and seized in the EU. This made up 13% of their entire wild population. The pet trade has also the potential for the translocation of zoonotic diseases, which pose a serious risk to human health. The act of keeping reptiles as pets is not only detrimental to their welfare, but also to public health. In the context of today's COVID-19 pandemic, this is even more relevant with its suspected transmission from wildlife. In the UK, 6,000 cases of reptile-related salmonella infections occur every year, and in children under 5 hospitalised for salmonella infections, over a quarter of these are from reptile pets. This is despite it being recommended these animals should not be in the home of children under 5. Additionally, stressed reptiles are more likely to shed infectious agents, providing a human-focused incentive to aim for positive reptile welfare. In an ideal world, the keeping of reptiles as companion animals would be abolished. It's argued that reptile needs are so complex, requiring a high level of scientific understanding they cannot be met in the home. This leads to a state of controlled deprivation, far from the aim of positive welfare for animals under human care. However, in the non-ideal world we live in, reptiles are growing in popularity and are clearly here to stay for the foreseeable future. Therefore, the risk must be mitigated before keeping reptiles can be phased out. This may include a strengthening of regulations. For example, in the UK, the DEFRA licensing regulations require pet shops to provide written information on all commercial sales, and all breeders, including online, are to be licensed. However, this regulation is not sufficient in that it fails to provide adequate space for snakes to stretch out. Regulations must therefore be amended, as this and the Animal Welfare Act do not appear to give sufficient protection to these animals. Since it's believed many welfare issues come from negligence in the form of a lack of knowledge, there must be improved pet keeper education. This could take the form of a system of certification of provable knowledge. Or education such as the contents of this presentation should be used to dissuade potential buyers, such as the risk and costs involved, including more research into the sentience of reptiles, which must be communicated to the general public to increase awareness of their needs. It's found informing prospective buyers about the personal risk of exotic pets, such as the new zoonotic diseases, could reduce consumer demand by up to 40%. For existing keepers, there must be awareness of myths in folklore husbandry, whilst avoiding these. They must be educated on husbandry to improve conditions where possible, but again, this will only lead to controlled deprivation rather than positive welfare. Evidence-based consumer awareness protocols, such as a labelling system, may help prevent irresponsible ownership and advocacy. This does not condone. To mitigate the destruction of the wildlife trade and welfare issues in reptiles, a positive list should be implemented in the UK. This would only allow trade in a number of species for which the objective scientific evidence exists. including an adaptability to the captive environment, available husbandry information, and zoonotic risk assessments. Positive lists reduce administrative costs and backlogs and stay ahead of the shifting trends in ways the current negative system currently cannot. The issue of welfare and wildlife trade is extremely complex, yet it seems clear for the sake of conservation and public health the global exotic pet trade must end. A move to captive breeding, however, will not solve all the problems as the source is difficult to verify and can be a cited loophole for further illegal trade. It is also suggested quarantines could be utilised, but this will not solve all the issues of natural bacteria within the gut of the animal, such as the issue of salmonella and potential pathogens. In conclusion, it's clear keeping reptiles as pets is detrimental to their individual welfare. Their 5 needs are not being met in captivity, in particular their need for a suitable environment, which is further detrimental to not only their health but behavioural needs. Folklore husbandry only confounds this problem. Welfare issues arise at every stage from intensive breeding to the home, even potential relinquishment. Conservation and human health are unacceptably negatively impacted by the reptile trade, and solutions such as increased education, regulation and a labelling system may help mitigate the problems. But ultimately, as the RSPCA states, animals should only be kept in captivity if good welfare can be achieved. This is not the case in reptile keeping. It is controlled deprivation at best. Positive welfare and a life worth living is not seen. Therefore, phasing out the trade should be the aim for future consideration.